We come together this morning and throughout this weekend to consider a subject that to me is a very exciting subject, and that is the whole concept of looking at the fact that we have not followed cunningly devised fables, but rather that we have a solid hope that is rooted in the word of truth, but is also proven by archaeology, by history, and by prophecy. We're going to begin with a look at Abraham. And we're looking at the concept of how he had to arise and walk through the land. And we read in Acts chapter 15 the process that God began with Abraham. In verse 14, we read that Simeon, or Simon Peter, hath declared how that God at first did visit the Gentiles to take out of them a people for his name. So that was his goal, was to take out of the Gentiles a people for his name. And that is what he has been doing ever since the time of Abraham. And so we have that in front of us this morning, and we're going to consider Abraham and how he came out. And if you just turn over to Genesis, we're going to spend most of our time in Genesis. In Genesis chapter 12, we have described for us there Abraham's journey. And we read in chapter 12, verse 1, Yahweh had said to Abraham, or Abram at the time, Get thee out of thy country, from thy kindred, from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee. And I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee. And in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. And we participate in the promise to Abraham through the power and the work of the Lord Jesus Christ. And looking at that last little phrase there, that in Abraham would all families of the earth be blessed. And so we're included in this. So when we look at Abraham, it's not just a Sunday school story. It's not just a figure from time gone by, but it involves our hope, and we're tied right in with this. And it's well worth studying the life of Abraham, where he went and the steps that he took, because we're actually asked to walk in his footsteps. We have in Romans chapter 4 and verse 11 this interesting phrase, that Abraham received the sign of circumcision, a seal of the faith which he had, yet being uncircumcised, that he might be the father of all them that believe. So that includes us. Though they be not circumcised, and we may not be Jews, that righteousness may be imputed to them also. And he's described as the father of the circumcision to them who are not of the circumcision, but who also walk in the steps of the faith of our father Abraham, which he had being yet uncircumcised. So we want to walk in the steps of the faith of our father Abraham. And we hope to do that this weekend, following him in his journeys. So we're going to begin with a look at him leaving Ur of the Chaldees. Now, Ur is, of course, there's the Persian Gulf, and to the north of it, you've got the river Euphrates that flows out of the Persian, or into the Persian Gulf, I should say, and set on the side of the river Euphrates, we have this great city of Ur of the Chaldees. And Ur of the Chaldees, where Abraham left, is not some mythological, sort of Narnia place that doesn't really exist. It is a real place that they have, of course, dug up. And here is the great ziggurat from Ur of the Chaldees. And Peter tells us in 2 Peter chapter 1, we have not followed cunningly devised fables, and we made known unto you the power and the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, but were eyewitnesses of his majesty. And brothers and sisters, and especially young people, as Christadelphians, we don't follow fairy tales, stories that have been made up, cunningly devised, like the Lord of the Rings series or something like that, where it's really fascinating and there's all this detail and intricacy and all the characters woven together by the art of men's device. No. What we have is the truth. These things are real. The people are real, the places are real, and you can put your trust in the biblical record that it is real. So we're going to look at the evidence of some of the places Abraham traveled. This is the ziggurat of Ur of the Chaldees, and here's what it looked like back when they first found it. And the Genesis record tells us that this is Abraham where he departed from. In Genesis 11, verse 31, Terah took Abraham his son, and Lot the son of Haran, his son's son, or his grandson, and Sarai his daughter-in-law, his son Abraham's wife, and they went forth with them from Ur of the Chaldees into the land of Canaan. So they left this place called Ur of the Chaldees. And it was Sir Leonard Woolley who excavated this in 1927. It was found or identified in 1862 by this man here, Henry Rawlinson, but it wouldn't really be fully excavated for years. So it sat like this great big hunk of stone in the sand for many years. Now what's interesting is what Paul tells us in Hebrews 11 of Abraham and the patriarchs. He says, look, if they had been thinking of that land from which they had gone out, they would have had opportunity to return. So if they'd thought about where they'd been, they probably would have wanted to go back, is kind of the gist of this. And that's something we really want to take to heart, because that's true. When they dug up Ur of the Chaldees, this is the city, the first excavations, what they first looked like. When they began digging up the city and looking at these things, and this is the very first diggings, as they dig down through the layers of sand and mud and dust that have accumulated over 3,500 years, what they found was pretty fascinating. So this is Sir Leonard Woolley, and I always get a kick out of the, Mad Dogs and Englishmen, right? There he is in his little knickers and his little socks pulled up to his knees. That's a sign, by the way, if you want to ever know who an Englishman is on a beach, they'll be wearing sandals with socks pulled up to their knees, probably a white shirt and a tie. That's just the way they are. They're all crazy. But here they are excavating in 1927. And what they found is fascinating, because the scripture says, look, if they had been mindful of the country they'd left, they probably would have wanted to go back. If they'd sat there and thought about it, the previous life, where they'd come from. And that's true, because here are some of the things that they found. This is a headdress from the tomb of a woman named Queen Pubai. And it's amazing, because this is intricate gold work and beads and things like this. This was not sort of a poor little mud hut town. This was quite the place. And there is the headdress here as it was found in situ. There's the teeth and all, but this is as it's been taken off and displayed now. This was the ram, as they call it, caught in a thicket. There's the original lying in the mud, and they dug it out, and the detail in this is pretty incredible. I mean, this was not a savage society. This was a very advanced society, and here are some of the royal stories. So if you're into graphic novels, well, that's how they told their history back then. It was all by graphic novel. And here's one of the graphic novels, the story of the prosperity of Ur of the Chaldees. They had these ornate, this is a lyre. There's Dr. Woolley again with his shorts and his knee socks. And there's the lyre, and on the face of the lyre there's this great bronze bull with lapis lazuli, which is a very rare gem form there in the eyes. And this was an incredible place. And this is what they dug up. These are some of the cosmetics. Little containers for cosmetics that they had at the time. There's the jewelry of the day. Earrings and necklaces and little amulets and all kinds of different things that they would wear, all made out of solid gold. So it's a pretty incredible place that Abraham left. But Abraham was to leave here, as we read in Genesis 11. They went forth together from Ur of the Chaldees to go into the land of Canaan, but when they came to Haran, they settled there. So they're on a journey. They'd been told to go to Canaan, but they had stopped along the way in Haran. And just to think for a moment, though, is that if they'd been mindful of where they'd come from, they might have gone back there. And that's something important for us to take in mind, brothers and sisters and young people. Sometimes, especially if we come in from the outside the truth, you can look back and think, oh, the good life. Maybe we had things a little bit better, or seemingly a little bit better, and life was good, and we had money, and we had this, and we had that, and we had all kinds of stuff. That'd be like Abraham saying, hey, Ur of the Chaldees was a pretty cushy life. We had like this palatial mansion we lived in, and we were very wealthy traders or whatever they were. And that's just a lesson for us, that we don't look back at the lives that we've had or could have had, or things we could have done, or even if we grew up in the truth, promotions we could have taken and things we could have done if it wasn't for the truth. Because the road that we walk, although it's difficult, leads to a much greater reward than anything that these people of old could have. So Terah dies in Haran. So this is Haran. Well, Ur of the Chaldees is here. We're on the river Euphrates. So this is just to give you a little bit of perspective. So here's the look of the land as it sits. This is the river Euphrates that runs here. all the way down. There's Ur in the very south, Persian Gulf's down here. And they walked up to Haran, which is up in this area into the north. So following the Euphrates River, it would have taken approximately 40 days to travel this distance. It's about 600 miles, and I know that you can walk theoretically 25 miles a day, but if you've got cattle and goods and a train of people, this isn't a forced military march where you're going to get 25 miles a day. It's probably going to be more like about 15 miles a day, because you have to get there before it gets pitch black and set up your camp and cook your food and things like that. So it would have been about 15 miles a day. It would have taken them about 40 days to get from Ur the Chaldees to Haran. Now, Haran itself is another city that is not mythological. It's mentioned in history, but it's also mentioned. This is Nabonidus' cylinder. So I don't know if you know what Nabonidus was. There was Nebuchadnezzar. Nabonidus is his son. And then Nabonidus' wife, by the way, is the woman in the story, the queen mother in Daniel, where Belshazzar, the king, basically, it's his mother, or actually it says the queen, but it's actually his mother. She was the wife of Nabonidus. So this is a cylinder from the time of Nabonidus, and it mentions and records the reconstructions of the temples of the moon god in Haran. And basically this was discovered at a temple in a place called Sychar. It's also mentioned in a place called Göbekli. Now, this is one of the most famous archaeological sites because it's the oldest archaeological site that they believe there is. I mean, they date it to like 9,000 BC or some crazy thing. We know it's not that old, but it's one of the oldest ones in record. And here as well, in Göbekli, they found this Haran tablet, and there it is down the bottom there, that mentions the name of the city of Abraham in Haran. So it was dug up there, and you can go to Haran today, and it is a mud hut city. This is today pretty much the way it would have been, more or less, at the time of Abraham. They are mud brick constructed buildings. They're built in a beehive way to ensure nice and cool in the summer, so the heat would rise, but also it's made so that basically in the wintertime, the insulation that you would have would keep it nice and warm as well. So this is the place, if we think of our Bible history, that years later Abraham would send his servant Eliezer back to. Genesis chapter 24 and verse 3, he says, I will make thee swear by Yahweh, the God of heaven and the God of the earth, that thou shalt not take a wife unto my son of the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I dwell. But thou shalt go unto my country, to my kindred, to take a wife unto my son Isaac. So this is where Eliezer of Damascus would have come to. He would have come to Haran. And there are some of the artifacts that have been dug up and are put on display there in this little kind of village, which is kind of like a pioneer-type village thing for tourists, a bit of a tourist trap. But it gives you the idea of what it would have been in the day. Years later, don't forget that Jacob would have come to Laban's house here. And this is where he would have been as a shepherd for many, many years. And so we read in Genesis 29, Jacob went on his journey and came into the land of the people of the east. And Jacob said unto them, My brethren, whence be ye? And they say, We are of Haran. And he said unto them, Know ye Laban, the son of Nahor? And they said, We know him. And he said unto them, Is he well? And they said, Yes, he's well. And Rachel, his daughter, comes with the sheep. So Rachel and Leah would have come from this city. And again, this is not a fairy story. It's not one of these, the Arabian Nights and Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves. This is a real deal. This is the city, and they are currently excavating at Haran as well. They've been doing it since the 20s, but you can see here that same mud brick construction that we talked about for those who were here last night, how they made their cities back in the old days out of mud brick, because it's prior to the Iron Age where they were not able to actually chisel the stone. And you can see the excavations that are going on there. So we move from Haran, and now we're going to come into the land of basically Canaan. So the journey is about 400 miles. It would take about 25 days. So coming from Haran, the first place he would have stopped would have been at Aleppo, and then down to Damascus. So names that we are very familiar with today. He would have traveled across the plains to the northwestern area of Canaan. So there's Damascus. We're now heading south, And what's fascinating about the land of Jordan is the way that it is divided by rivers. There's the Yarmuk River and the Jabbok River. And the Jabbok River is a massive expanse. So it divides the land of Moab from the land of Ammon in the north. And those names are still with us today. Like we've got Ammon is the capital of Jordan, which was Amman back in Bible times. So this is the Jabbok River. And you go down this very, very steep and a ravenous place, or ravine, is there, and Charlene and I have been there and seen it, and there's no just walking across it. It's a huge divider, natural divide, cross the Jordan, up into the mountains, basically, of the area of what is kind of Samaria today, and he would have come across to this place called Shechem, which is there, seated between Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal, and so that's where he would have come. And, of course, we find here that Abraham, in Genesis 12, verse 6, he passed through the land unto the place of Sychem, as it's originally called, or Shechem, unto the plain of Moriah, and the Canaanite was in the land. And Yahweh appeared unto Abraham, said, Unto thy seed have I given this land. And he builded an altar there unto Yahweh, who appeared to him. So he's in the plain, and the word there, if you want to take a note, is the idea of actually alone. E-L-O-W-N, and it means a tree. Okay, it's the tree of Morah, and Morah is the Hebrew word meaning teacher. So it's the tree of the teacher. That's where Abraham came, the oak or the tree of the teacher. And of course, this is the character of Abraham. He was a teacher. In fact, it's picked up in later on in Genesis, in chapter 18, when the angels come and they're going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, they say of Abraham that surely Abraham will become a great nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. And they say, I know him, that he will command his children and his household after him. They shall keep the way of Yahweh to do justice and judgment, that Yahweh may bring upon Abraham that which he hath spoken of him. So this is the character of Abraham. He was a teacher. First place he comes to in the land is the oak of the teacher, and he's known as a teacher of his children, that he will teach them the way of Yahweh so they will walk in it. So if we want to walk in the footsteps of Abraham, that has to be one of our prime directives as brethren and sisters, to be teachers of our families and of our ecclesial families so that our children will know how to walk in the way of Abraham and the way of Yahweh. Well, this is Shechem today. It sits in a very dangerous little spot in Nablus, basically. This is Nablus. Terrible place. If you remember the picture of Time magazine of the young Israeli soldiers that were murdered, it was in this place where the men hold up their hands with the blood. So this is Nablus, but in the middle of this is the ancient ruins of Shechem. And this, of course, is the city that's been unearthed today, right there, and you can see the stones of the city and the different constructions that were there, and it's been around, of course, since the time of Abraham. But it's there in Nablus, right center of the town, and you can see the old city wall here as well. That dates from a little later on. But this is the city, and there's the gates that date from the time of Solomon, the great big city gates, and it's there today, and you can go and visit it under armed guard and probably at night, but you can go visit it if you so desire. So this is the city of Tel Shalem, which is close to Shechem, because it wasn't just Abraham that came to this area, but it was also Jacob. And we read in Genesis chapter 33 that Jacob came to Shalem, a city of Shechem. So Shechem was kind of like the head city over a whole geographical region, and Jacob came into the area of Shechem, and he dwelt in a place called Salem, which is in the land of Canaan, and when he came from Padad Aram and pitched his tent before the city. And he bought a parcel of a field where he had spread his tent, and of the hand of the children of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of money, and he erected there an altar and called it El Elohei Israel. So this is the area of Shechem, and this is where Abraham came, in this geographical region, so the whole area round about, which would have been under control. Up to the side here is where Jacob would come, and he would dwell after he crossed the river Jordan in this little Tel, which is called now Tel Shalem, which was the city where basically Jacob would be based out of. And it's amazing because they've found it today. And it's there, and when they did digging here, what they actually found was a bust of Hadrian, the emperor. You may have seen this bust. This is where it was found. Because in John chapter 3 and verse 23, this is the place where John was baptizing in Aenon near Salem, because there was much water there, and they came and were baptized. And so right past here, just over to the side, is the River Jordan, and that's where John the Baptist was. This is where he was baptizing in Salem, basically north in the territory of Shechem. So that is Shechem today, as it is. And of course, it's a story of great tragedy. It was a city center. There was lots of rural areas round about. And of course, like young people like to do, Dinah, the daughter of Leah, in Genesis chapter 34, she wanted to go hang out at the mall with her friends. So that's exactly what she did. She went down to Shechem, to the city, and to see the daughters of the land. So it, girls thing, getting together, that's how it started out. But yeah, it wasn't really the way it ended up, because Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, the prince of the country, saw her, he took her, he lay with her, and he defiled her. So young people, if you mix with the world, this is the morality of the world. Shechem didn't really know any better. I mean, it's not like he was a bad guy. He was actually a good guy for the people of the land. I mean, the Bible actually tells you that. He was a nice man. I mean, he was kind of a Casanova, the way it's described in the Bible. I mean, he was somebody who loved this young lady. I mean, just read the words of Genesis 34, verse 3. His soul clave to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob. He loved the damsel and spoke kindly to the damsel. And that phrase, spoke kindly, is the same phrase that's used of Boaz and Ruth. And it means to speak to the heart. He really, genuinely loved this young lady, this young Christadelphian girl, in the way that he knew how, which was fornication, because he was a Canaanite and he had no morality. And so that's what he did, was what he knew how to do, and that's how he showed his love. It doesn't mean he didn't love her. But young people, that's the world we live in. A world that doesn't share our morality, does not have the morality of the Bible. And so if we have relationships with it, that's where it's going to want to go. Genesis 34, verse 19, he was a good guy, though. The young man deferred not to do the thing because he had delight in Jacob's daughter, and he was more honorable than all the house of his father. He was more honorable. He was the most honorable in the whole land. But that's still what he did. But he was so in love with this young lady that he agreed to basically subject himself to circumcision. And not just him, but all the men of the city. And of course, we know the rest of the story, and how that basically when this happened, there was a great disaster. But there was motive, too, behind Shechem and Hamor. Genesis 34, verse 20, and don't think the world doesn't have its motives. Hamor and Shechem, his son, came to the gate of the city, and this, by the way, is the gate of the city, and the men of their city communed with them, and they said, look, these men are peaceable with us. Let us therefore let them dwell in the land and trade therein. For the land, behold, it's large enough for them. Let us take their daughters unto us for wives. Let us give them our daughters. Only herein will the men consent unto us for to dwell with us, to be of one people, if every male among us be circumcised, as they are circumcised. Shall not, and now this is the motive, their cattle and their substance and every beast of theirs be ours? Well, let us consent unto them, that they will dwell with us. So even in his honorableness, that's the world. Even when there's good guys out there, they have an agenda. And their agenda was to assimilate this people, to take them over, to take all their cattle and all their goods that they had. And this is that gate of Shechem where they met to cook this plot up. And it's there today, brothers and sisters. It's amazing. You can go there and you can see it. And so we have, of course, another event that took place is that in Joshua 24, verse 32, when Joseph died, the bones of Joseph, with the children of Israel brought up out of Egypt, they buried in Shechem, in a parcel of ground which Jacob bought of the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, for 100 pieces of silver. And it became the inheritance of the children of Joseph. So in this geographical region, I mean, of course, they have, this is the tomb of Joseph, but who really knows? They got a church there, and they'll sell you something. I mean, they always do at a church, right? But they have, it's in that geographical region that, of course, Joseph is buried. but it's also a place where the Lord Jesus Christ would visit later on. Oh, incidentally, it's Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, who made Israel to sin. He built up the area of Shechem and Mount Ephraim, and also Penuel. Well, this is the wall from the Iron Age period that was built by Jeroboam that sits in Shechem. It's a Bronze Age city wall. But the Lord Jesus Christ would go there, and he would go to a well that was in Sychar. So John chapter 4, Jesus left Judea, departed thence to Galilee. He must needs go through Samaria. He comes to a city of Samaria, which is called Sychar, near a parcel of ground that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. Now, Jacob's well was there. Jesus, therefore, being wearied with his journey, sat thus on the well, and it was about the 6th hour. And of course, they built a great church over the well. There is the old surface level of the well. And what happens here is that the woman, of course, draws from the water and gives it to Jesus to drink. And he says to her, look, whosoever drinks of the water that I will give him shall never thirst. But the water that I will give him shall be in him a well of water springing up into eternal life. And so, brothers and sisters, places like Shechem have to make us think about what is important in our lives. Are we interested in mixing with the world and kind of just becoming part of it, being assimilated into it? Or are we interested in coming to the Lord and drawing of the water of life, which is going to be there in us, an eternal well, springing up to everlasting life? Well, from Shechem, Abraham moves on. He removes thence to the mountain that is east of Bethel and pitched his tent, having Bethel on his west and Ai on the east. Now, it's actually pronounced I. You'll hear that when you go to the land. They don't call it Ai, it's just I. And it's on the east, and there he built an altar to Yahweh. So he moves his tent to the next place, and he builds an altar there to Yahweh and calls upon the name of Yahweh. So if we leave Shechem, where he's built an altar, there's Ebal and Gerizim there, and we head basically from here through the different valleys, and you can see that the paths now, they built roads there today, but he would have taken a very similar path through all these mountain passes that pass all the way through, and you come around, and it's a fairly hilly area, of course, throughout this whole area. It's the hill country in Israel. Whoops, hold on a minute. Let's just hit this button. Try that again. There we go. Okay, so he comes there and he builds an altar in Bethel, which is, or close to the area of Bethel, and pitches his tent between Bethel and Ai. Now, it's also a place that, of course, remember, Jacob comes to later on. And Jacob, in Genesis chapter 28, verse 18, comes to Bethel, and he rose early in the morning and took the stone that he had put for his pillow and set up for a pillar and poured oil upon the top, and he called the name of the place Bethel, but it was first the name of the city called Luz. Right? So this is where Abraham was. Jacob is now there. He's fleeing from Esau. He's heading over to Syria, and he builds an altar there, or he sets up this pillar and pours oil upon it. So Bethel became known as the house of God. But of course, we know Israel's history, and it would be here that the people in the time of Jeroboam, in chapter 12 and verse 27, Jeroboam reasons, and he says, look, if the people go up to the house of sacrifice in the house of Yahweh at Jerusalem, then shall the heart of this people turn again to the Lord, even unto their Lord, even unto Rehoboam king of Judah, and they shall kill me, and go again to Rehoboam king of Judah. Whereupon the king took counsel and made 2 calves of gold, and said unto them, it's too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Behold your gods, O Israel, which brought you out of the land of Egypt, which is a quote directly from Aaron, when they made the golden calf in the wilderness. And he set the one in Bethel, and the other he put in Dan, which of course is up in the north. And you can go to Bethel today, and there is the platform of the temple structure in Bethel, where Jeroboam placed and built a temple there, and put the lowest of the people to be the priests, and instituted worship there. And it's all there. There's a guard tower. There's the temple area. There's olive presses that are there in Bethel. And there's also tombs in Bethel. And what's interesting is that there are tombs there today, and you can see them, because in the time of Josiah, he came along and he destroyed the worship of the golden calf in this area. But it also mentions the tombs. So this is 2 Kings 23, verse 14. He broke in pieces the pillars and cut down the Asherim and filled their places with the bones of men. Moreover, the altar of Bethel, the high place, erected by Jeroboam the son of Nebat, who made Israel to sin, that altar with the high place he pulled down and burned, reducing it to dust. He also burned the Asherah. And Josiah turned, and he saw the tombs there on the mount. And he sent and took the bones out of the tombs and burned them on the altar and defiled it, according to the word of Yahweh that the Lord, or that the man had of God proclaimed, who predicted these things. So there's the tombs still today that Josiah went in and grave robbed and desecrated this place and destroyed it because God had said this would be the way it is. So that's the amazing thing, is you've got the stories of the Bible, and you can go there and you can see the actual tombs that have been there all this time. Well, in Ai, that was where Abraham's camp was. You had Bethel, Abraham's camp over here. We now come to the little city of Ai, or Ai. What's fascinating about the city of Ai is the way that it is situated. So it sits on the top of this hill. There's all neighborhoods around it today, but there's the archaeological site on the top of the hill, and there's a great big valley here, and there's hills on this side, and there's hills behind it, and this is what happened when Joshua got there in Joshua chapter 8, verse 11. All the fighting men who were with him went up and drew near before the city, and encamped on the north side, which would be over here, of Ai, and with a ravine between them, and there's the ravine. And he took about 5,000 men and set them in ambush between Bethel and Ai to the west of the city. So they stationed their forces, the main encampment that was north of the city and its rear guard west of the city, but Joshua spent his night in this valley right here. And it's amazing because you can go there, and there is this archaeological site of Ai, or Ai as it's called, and the city has been excavated, and this is the place that they took. Now, we're going to have a little piece of video in just a moment, just as they've excavated this, and Brother Lane was involved in this excavation, and it's actually when they were there excavating that Dr. Collins, who was there with Lane, said, look, reading his Bible, he goes, well, if it was that, Lot lifted up his eyes when he was between Bethel and Ai and looked towards the Sychar, the circle of the Jordan, then Sodom's not at the bottom of the Dead Sea. It's got to be right across from we are, and that's where they went and they looked for it, and that's where they found it, and that's what we looked at last night. But this was the place where they were. And here they are excavating in Ai, and here is the old city. They're digging through. They do these little squares as they dig down, and they find the ruins of the city. And there's Brother Lane as he's doing some diagrams and excavating this out. And here's the olive press in Ai. And pretty fascinating. As they dug down, they found a functional area where they would dump the olives through from the roof. And basically they would press them here and press them here. And the juices of the olives would run out, and they would put bowls in here, and they would collect the olive oil. And it's a fascinating thing. And there was also, I was on the internet and I was looking and I found this, again, one of these gate posts, actually next to a brother who we went to Israel with, and he'd been back to the land and excavating there. And so this is what we read about. The men of Ai killed about 36 of the Israelites and chased them before the gate, and there's a gate post, as far as Shebarim, and struck them at the descent. And the hearts of the people melted and became as water. So that was the first tragedy that happened in Ai, is that when they lost because of Achan, who had taken the Babylonian garment and the silver and the gold and things when they took the battle at Jericho. So when they went back, there were specific instructions that were given to Joshua. And this is the fascinating part, because this here is ash. There's an ash layer at Ai as they dig all the way down. You think, well, why is that so important? Well, because it says, as soon as you have taken the city, you shall set the city on fire. You shall do according to the word of Yahweh. See, I have commanded you. So this was one of the cities that they set on fire. Now, when they're excavating there, I'm just going to let the archaeologists tell you the story of what took place. So this is Dr. Scott Strickland excavating at the place which is called Khirbet el Makar and Maktar. And this is what he has to say.
Hi, I'm Dr. Scott Stripling. It's June 12, 2015. It's the final day of our excavation at Kerbat-el-Makadar. I'm standing in a square where we've been exposing a large section of the Bronze Age wall. This area has been supervised by Dr. Bryant Wood. They've just come down on an amazing area. We have a heavy layer of ash just above bedrock, and embedded with this, we have pieces of late Bronze Age pottery, even embedded among the bedrock. Now, the reason this is of such great interest to us is because when we read the biblical account in Joshua 8, we see that the city of Ai, which is what we believe this is, was destroyed in a fiery conflagration in about 1406 at the end of the Late Bronze period, Late Bronze 1 period. There are 3 cities that were burned by the Israelites: Jericho, Hatzor, and Ai. When we go to Hatzor, we can see evidence of burn and destruction. At Jericho, we see the same. When we come down on bedrock here, we have fused calcined stone, a heavy layer of ash embedded with this late Bronze Age pottery. The lesson that we're drawing from this is that we should take the Bible as a serious historical text because it's being confirmed by the archaeology.
So to me, that's fascinating. You know, this is only like 2015. They've dug down to bedrock, and what have they found? Ash, which is exactly the way it's described in Joshua. That's what we should expect to find. And as he said, it's in Hatzor. We've been there. We've seen it. It's in Jericho. They've got evidence of it there as well. And here they have it in Ai. There's only 3 cities that they burned, and there is the evidence there in front of you. What's also fascinating, though, about Ai is that this is from here that it would be that Joshua would then go on back to Mount Ebal and Gerizim. And this is Joshua chapter 8 and verse 30. At that time, Joshua built an altar to Yahweh, the God of Israel, on Mount Ebal, just as Moses, the servant of Yahweh, had commanded the people of Israel, as it is written in the book of the law of Moses, an altar of uncut stones upon which no man has wielded an iron tool. And they offered it to burnt offerings to Yahweh and sacrificed peace offerings. So what's fascinating is what they found on Mount Ebal is this massive structure. It's a massive altar. Now, there's a bit of debate about this because some of the archaeologists don't really want to believe this is real. They're more the New Age ones. But here is an altar structure that has been found on Mount Ebal. And what was found inside the altar was ashes with animal fragments. So when they took the fragments, the bones and whatever else, and they had them examined, they found that they were all young animals, which you can tell from bone structure, and there were no unclean animals amongst them, no pigs. So this wasn't Canaanite worship. There was nothing unclean there at all. They were all clean animals, and that is the altar that sits on top of Mount Ebal. And it's amazing because, again, it's a testimony to the Word of God. And there you can see the valley below there as they look out from Mount Ebal. So here's a reconstruction done by Brother Lane. This is the altar as it would have stood in Solomon's temple, right? Here is the altar that's on Mount Ebal. And you can see the similarity of the square structure with the ramp that goes up, and there you've got the ramp, and there's the square structure. Identical in its construction to what was there in the tabernacle years gone by. So what also they found there, amongst the different refuse and stuff that they dug up, was an Egyptian scarab. Basically, it's been descaled or cleaned from around this altar. So artifacts from Egypt, where Israel had just come from 40 years earlier, still carrying them with them, found at this site. So a fascinating picture as well. So we leave Abraham's count between Bethel and Ai, and we're told there in Genesis chapter 12, verse 9, that Abraham journeyed going on still towards the south, which is the Hebrew word Negev. So we move towards the south, which is typically the area, we believe, where Abraham spent a lot of time around Beersheba. And this is the city of Beersheba in the south. You can see the desert area around this. Abraham stayed there for a period of time, and Genesis chapter 12 tells us basically that he journeyed on from there and went down into Egypt, and then from Egypt he would then come back into the land. Where exactly he was in Egypt, we're not totally sure, but Genesis chapter 12, verse 10, there was a famine in the land, so Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was grievous in the land. So, problematic time period for Abraham, And it would bring trials later on for them as they left Israel, went into Egypt. And sometimes we do that in our lives. You know, things are tough in the meeting, tough in the truth, tough in a geographical area, so we shift to somewhere else, and that's what Abraham did. But of course, when he went down to Egypt, he and his wife and all that he had, Lot was with him. Abraham was very rich in silver and gold. He had gained a lot out of Egypt after the scenario with the king and so on. And so he went on his journey from the south, even to Bethel, to the place where his tent had been in the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, unto the place of the altar which he had made at the first. And Abraham called on the name of Yahweh. So he's gone into Egypt, he's collected all this stuff, and now basically he would travel back from Egypt, across the northern area, probably back to Beersheba on the way, where of course there was an oasis, and they would then travel there back up to the land of Israel and back to the area of Ai and Bethel, where his camp had first been. Now, of course, when they get there, there is a huge problem, because Lot also, which went with Abraham, had flocks and herds and tents, and the land was not able to bear them, that they might dwell together, for their substance was so great. So they could not dwell together, and there was strife between the herdmen of Abraham's cattle and the herdmen of Lot's cattle when they're dwelling in this area. And so, of course, we know what would take place in this area is that once Abraham and Lot got there and couldn't dwell together, then Lot would start looking around, and they decide, of course, that they're going to separate one from another. So Lot lifts up his eyes and beholds all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere before Yahweh destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, even as the garden of Yahweh, like the land of Egypt, as thou comest to Zoar. And Lot chose him the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east. And so that's what Lot would have done. He would have left Abraham's camp, and he would have journeyed, and there's Jericho and Gilgal, back through this area, across Jordan, to the area of Sodom. There's Mount Nebo up there. This is where Israel would later camp as they would come into the land. And later on, it would be Abel Shittim, would be the land, the city of Solomon would be built there as well. So he ends up establishing himself here, and we looked at the story of Lot last night. We're not going to spend some time on it today. What we want to look at is what Abraham did, because Abraham moves on from here as well. After that Lot is separated from him, Yahweh said to Abraham, lift up now your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward and southward and eastward and westward. For all the land which you see, I'm going to give it to you and to your seed forever. And I will make your seed as the dust of the earth, so that if a man can number the dust of the earth, so shall thy seed also be numbered. Arise, walk through the land, the length of it and the breadth of it, will I give it to thee. So Abraham sets off on this journey again to walk through the land, through the length of it, and through the breadth of it. In chapter 13, verse 18, Abraham removes his tent and comes to dwell in the plain of Mamre, which is Hebron, and builds an altar to Yahweh there. So that's exactly what he does. He shifts his camp from where he was, and he's going now towards the south of Israel. He will cross over the area of Salem, which is where Melchizedek is, Lot being over here in the area of Sodom, and he's going to travel south to the area of Hebron. And again, this is another fascinating city. We had the good fortune to be able to visit there when we were in Israel last time. We hope to do so again in April. And to me, when you're in a place like that, you don't always recognize and see what's standing in front of you. And it was Brother David Billington that pointed this out to me the other day, and that this is Hebron. This is the ancient staircase in Hebron. And this staircase actually dates back to the early Bronze Age, about 4,500 years ago, so even before the time of Abraham, about 700 years before him. And what's fascinating is that, in Israel, if you want to build, you have to first dig for archaeological ruins. So that's what they did. They started digging in Hebron because the Jews wanted to build a community there. This is where Hebron is, where Abraham was, and we actually went and visited with them, and a guy named David Wilder who was there, and asked him, well, why did you pick Hebron? He said, why would we not pick Hebron? Whips his Bible open, Genesis, this is where Abraham was, this is where they're buried, this is where we need to be, this is in touch with our roots. And so they built this apartment block, but before they could build, they had to excavate, and this is what they found. This is the ancient city of Hebron, and the apartment building is built right over top of this. And there's a Jewish community there, and they live in these kind of like tiny little homes. all around it. You can see there's the kindergarten, the little playground. And it's just fascinating because there's the kids playing side by side with the wells and the structure that would have been there in the time of Abraham. And David pointed out to me, he said, look at this. He says, read Amos chapter 9, verse 11. In that day I will raise up the tabernacle of David that is fallen down, close up the breaches thereof. I will raise up his ruins, and I will build it as in the days of old. And I will bring again the captivity of my people of Israel, and they shall build the waste cities and inhabit them. And they shall plant the vineyards and drink the wine of them. They shall make gardens and eat the fruit of them. He says, look at it, Jonathan. Here's the city of Abraham, and over top of it is built the new city. I will raise up the ruins. Where was David first made king? In the city of Hebron. He lived there for 7 years. And these are the ruins that are being raised up literally right over top of the archaeological evidence of Abraham and of David in times gone by. To me, that just sends the hair on the back of my head standing up, because you realize there's archaeology, there's Bible prophecy, there's the whole thing all coming together as God brings about the gospel, the good news of the kingdom of God on earth, right in front of our very eyes, and a testimony to us. So from here, Abraham journeys toward the territory of the Negev and lives between Kadesh and Shur in a place called Gerar. And of course, we know the story of Abimelech and Gerar, kind of a rerun of the same problem he had elsewhere. So from Hebron, moving to the south, there's Beersheba. And just to the east of that or to the west of that, is the town of Gerar. And again, Gerar is a place where they have excavated, and they have found there the evidence, again, of a time period dating back to that of Abraham. And it's just to the south and to the west of Beersheba. And so here is flying over the area of Gerar. And here are the ruins. These are Bronze Age walls buried under all this. You'll see them a little bit better in a moment. There's actually mud brick in here that'll come to light shortly. And this is where they found, again, in this hill, this tell, so it's a raised structure. There are these ruins there, and you can see basically some of the excavations down in the south here, some of the building structures. You can see linings of rooms and stuff like that they've been digging. It's a little bit grown over in this area here. But this is the area of Gerar where Abraham went. And of course, this is where God shut up the womb of Abimelech's wife and his maidservants. But it's also likely the place where Isaac was actually born, was in this area of Gerar when you look at the timeline of Abraham. So there it is. There's the mud brick. You can see it a little bit better there, dating back to the time. Again, they keep covering over, and the rains come and it buries it in, and they have to dig it out. So that's where Abraham was. He moves back to Beersheba and plants a grove there, and calls upon the name of Yahweh, the everlasting God. And Abraham sojourns in the land of the Philistines, moving around from one place to another for many days. Here is Beersheba. That's the city where he would plant the grove. This is the ancient ruins, some of which date from a later time. But underneath it, they have found the city itself. It's built in a circular fashion because it's in the south in the Negev. So whenever it rains, they want to collect all the water they possibly can. And the city's built like a great big bowl, so that all the streets of the city, whenever it rains, all that water would run to the center, and they would collect the water in the center so that it would basically drain all that water together. And you can see the mud bricks and the different structures there in the city of Beersheba. So this is the old plan of the city himself, done by Brother Lane, and you can see how basically the city was structured, so all the water would go to the center. And so there's the ruins of it, what's left today. And just fascinating to be able to see, exactly what we read about in the Bible. And you can go to land and you can find these places there today. And these are some of the ruins that date from later on, from the time of Solomon. And the structures there, the pillars that would hold up the roofing structure for the house itself, and the wells that have been built, and the different evidences. It was in this region, probably back up in the area of Bethel, that Genesis tells us that Abraham is tempted or tested by God, and he's told to take his son, his only son Isaac, whom he loves, get to the land of Moriah, and to offer there for him a burnt offering, or offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains. So Abraham would have left Beersheba. He would have headed north by the area of Hebron once again, back to the area where his camp was first, and then he would have come down into the area of Mount Moriah, which of course we know is where the Temple Mount is, which we're going to look at in our second class. And here is where God would test Abraham, and he would ask him to offer there his son Isaac for an offering. And brothers and sisters, that teaches us a lot, because Abraham is known for his obedience. That's really the key. Genesis 22, he says, "By myself have I sworn," this is God speaking of Abraham, "because thou hast done this thing, and that thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, then in blessing I will bless thee, in multiplying I will multiply thy seed as the stars of heaven, and as the sand which is on the seashore. And thy seed shall possess the gate of his enemies, and in thy seed shall all nations of the earth be blessed, because you obeyed my voice." When raising children, brothers and sisters and young people, that's the key. It's not about the child's comfort. It's not about what they want necessarily, always. It's about what God wants for the child, and putting our trust that he knows what's right. Abraham trusted him to the point that he was willing to put his son to death. Now, Isaac would have been probably 17 or thereabouts at this point in time. But we just need to remember that when raising our kids. Obedience is more important than their comfort or our comfort. I mean, can you imagine being Abraham having to go and do this? Abraham's son Isaac, though, benefited from his choice. I mean, he must have gone along with this, obviously. You know, if he's 17 years old and Abraham's 100 plus. He must have gone along with it. But nonetheless, he benefited from that obedience, because the promises were later extended to him and to his children, Jacob, and then to the grandchildren, the tribes. So Abraham returns unto his young men, and they rose up and went again to Beersheba. And Abraham dwells at Beersheba for another time. He's there for quite some time. And then we find in Genesis 23 that Sarah is 107 and 20 years old, so 127, she dies. And she's in Kirjath Arba, which is Hebron, in the land of Canaan, and Abraham goes to mourn for her there. And he goes there to Ephron the Hittite in Genesis 23, verses 10 to 11, to the gate of the city, and he negotiates there for the cave of Machpelah. This is the stairway that leads up to the gate structure up at the top, where Abraham would have negotiated with Ephron the Hittite to purchase the cave of Machpelah. And it's amazing because it's there. And you can go to the cave of Machpelah today. It's a structure that has existed from a long, long time. It was memorialized by Herod the Great, taken over by the Muslims who built a mosque on top. There's now a synagogue there as well. And that's a reconstruction, I think, done by Brother Lane. Machpelah literally means the double cave, and there's the double cave underneath this great structure. And it's amazing, brothers and sisters, because this is where Sarah and Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Leah, these are where they're buried, Rebekah, in this cave of Machpelah. And there it sits in all its kind of like glory, so to speak. It was built by Herod the Great. I mean, just think about this. He died in 3 BC. Hebron was a Levitical city. And the Levites that basically dwelt there were the family of John the Baptist at this point in time. So John the Baptist would have grown up and seen this very structure that still stands today. It's the last structure that Herod built that is fully standing today. He would have grown up around this area. Mary would have come by this when she came to visit her sister Elizabeth in the hill country of Judea. No doubt the Lord and his disciples would have passed through this area as well. And it is there today, and you can go and visit it and recognize when you're standing there that these are the stones which John the Baptist would have seen. And buried just in that complex somewhere is Abraham, who very soon is going to be raised from the dead. And you can reach out, you can touch those stones, and you can be in touch with Abraham, with John the Baptist, and realize that, you know what? We haven't followed Cunningly Devised Fables. This is the truth. This is real, it's concrete, it's solid. This is the testimony of the Bible. And we can walk in the footsteps of the faith of our father Abraham if we take his life as a parable to ourselves and a lesson to ourselves and try and live our lives in the exact same way.